Welcome everyone to our exclusive webinar looking at the future of the aftermarket organization. My name is Thomas Igu, Head of Content at Copperberg. Before we begin, a few general announcements. The recording of the webinar will be made available to all participants later this week. And if you have questions for our speaker during the webinar, please submit them via the Q&A button on your Zoom control panel. We will conclude the webinar with a Q&A session. And if we do not have time to go through your question, we will make sure to follow up with an answer post-webinar. So the pandemic has really changed customer behavior and therefore forcing businesses to adapt their business models for profitability. And for manufacturing companies with an aftermarket organization, an opportunity to shift strategy and exceed customer expectations will be in the near and long term a fruitful outcome. Aftermarket organizations today have not reached their full potential yet as a strategic business or making the impact they can on the bottom line. But there is strong possibility to do so in the very near future. And other than customer behavior, existing trends have heightened in influence, such as e-commerce, IoT, and in general, digitalization of channels. So with so much uncertainty earlier this year, we now know the effects the pandemic has made in the market, in which direction aftermarket organizations should be heading towards. So the question that remains is, will the aftermarket become the market? So what we're going to focus on today, first is a historical journey of the aftermarket organization. Then we're going to look at factors influencing the change. Is the perception of ownership changing? We'll also look at what will not change the aftermarket business. Then we're going to go into business model elements to consider for innovation. And finally, we will look at a comparison of typical aftermarket organizations versus those already advancing. And joining me today is Kalle Airikala. Kalle has worked within the pricing and product management profession for the last 13 years, starting with Finnish tech companies supporting service and spare parts pricing globally. Currently, Kalle works with Vendavo as a senior consultant, helping a broad range of customers to achieve better results through improved pricing. And even after 13 years, every day Kalle learns something new, and the world of pricing is, according to him, incredibly interesting as it touches on basically every function within a company. So on that note, I will ask Kalle to take over, and keep in mind that I will ask him later on in the Q&A what he's actually learned today. So Kalle, off to you.
Thank you, Thomas. And good afternoon and welcome on my behalf as well. And really, like Thomas says, really the key question that we want to examine and maybe in parts answer today is why to invest in the aftermarket organization? Why to put that investment in to make it a success? And I think for us today, we can answer that in a very clear and a fast way. It just makes sense. That's all there is to it. And then we can close up shop for today. But I think that may be not enough of an answer. That may be enough of an answer to many of us who have joined today. But for those who are less familiar with an aftermarket services, maybe we need to elaborate this a bit more. One way of convincing people that investing in aftermarket services is through financials. That is a very well respected way of justifying any investment as it should be. We can take a look on the benefits of aftermarket services from two angles today. How does focus on aftermarket services affect profitability? And can aftermarket act as a bridge over turbulent business cycles? And we first examined the link between aftermarket services focus and financial results by taking a small study of some publicly listed European manufacturing companies who also report service business results separately. From this data that is displayed at the moment, we can see that companies with the highest profitability level also have highest aftermarket services shares in their business. This is, of course, very encouraging for us, but the picture also shows that even though profit trends higher, the increase is not extremely strong before share goes above roughly 55%. So I think we have the baseline case here, but I would say more research and analysis would be needed to argue that this correlation alone would be the ticket to justifying investment. And I think here we need then to look at the aftermarket services also as a stabilizing factor. And I think this year, 2020, is a very good year to examine that, as this COVID-19 has provided us a clear disturbance to what you could call normal business. So let's see about profitability changes pre and after COVID-19. So comparing last year to this year results. And if we look at the drop in profitability in relation to the share of aftermarket services, there seems to be a clear correlation between these. This small study would then indicate that the investment in aftermarket services, which could be argued is probably higher with the companies that have higher share of that business, would pay off, especially as a carryover for turbulent times. And actually, it may be that these old times will never return, and aftermarket services will have increased importance in the future constantly. This is why we consider that aftermarket could become the market, as Thomas said in the beginning. To develop that thinking further, however, it makes sense to first consider how have aftermarket services developed so far, as understanding how did we get here is a usually good starting point to plot the next course forward. And for this, we'll look at, let's say, in a few steps. Historically, the aftermarket service business in industrial companies has followed a development path that starts with service as a necessity. For example, supporting warranty or break fix cases, but not considered as a revenue and profit-generating business worthy of focus. In this stage of maturity, the critical next step is the development of organizational capabilities, building the right teams to create a platform upon which the aftermarket service business can grow. This is the beginning of the shift in the organization's mindset to perceiving aftermarket services as a key value driver, delivering benefits for the whole company. The next step is to promote the aftermarket service business into a standalone entity with a head of department and links to the so-called main business through technology. At this point, the investment is focused on functional aspects of the aftermarket service business, commercial excellence, logistics, technical support, and development of new business models. Once the aftermarket service business reaches maturity, the next step is actually incorporating it back into the rest of the business. Aftermarket services are seen as the integral part of the overall offering and a way to differentiate in the market. Investment is now focused on creating leading capabilities in the most important functions. However, any competitive advantage gained can be short-lived without continued development. Innovation around new business models delivering enhanced customer value will be the key to maintaining a competitive advantage here. And then if we go all the way to the fourth step, then there the development of a service-centric business is really the final step. And that will probably completely transform the structure of the organization. There, the service takes the lead and is supported by the technology that itself used to be the main business, putting it sort of upside down. In recent years, a trend has grown of a new market entrance leapfrogging directly to a service-led thinking. This is done through business models that no longer use the classic sales and after-sales split in the business and in organizations, but instead have adopted subscription-based business models from the outset. This jump has been made possible by advancements in both technology and finance. This and other elements are reshaping the aftermarket services journey for many companies. And this is something that we want to be examining on the latter part of our session today. But before venturing there, Thomas will give us a short poll to see where we are at today.
Yeah. So there should be a poll launching on your screen. So where do you position your aftermarket service business today based on the historical journey that Kelly has just outlined? And while I give a few seconds to all participants to answer that, Kelly, we actually had a very quick question already in terms of the charts you showed us right before this slide on EBIT. Do you have any info on the sources of those charts? Are they from Vendavo or is it from a third-party source?
That is our own study made through, let's say, companies published information through their annual and half-year results, basically.
Okay. Perfect. And I had also another question. So yes, we will be able to share a copy of the actual PDF, Kelly, correct? I mean, the recording will be sent to all participants, but the PDF itself we can share as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Good. So then I will show the results live, so everyone should be seeing them, including yourself, Kelly. So we are kind of split between services are part of our solution and services run on its own, both with 33% of participants. And then we have about 24% services are the business and 10% it's not a real business.
No.
I don't know your thoughts on that. Is that how you see it as well among your customer base and yeah?
That's a really interesting distribution. I would say that if maybe I'm biased to somewhere, but I think I'm really happy to see the 24% that are really service focused. I think that's an excellent achievement for any of those organizations.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great sign that how companies are going into this direction.
Absolutely, it's a good crowd. So continue then, Kelly.
Thank you, Thomas. So I think, as we discussed earlier, one development is that leapfrogging the aftermarket service business maturity ladder has become easier through development in technology. This development opens new possibilities to establish aftermarket service business models as the core strategy of the company. One key technological enhancement comes from the IoT that enables remote equipment condition monitoring and in-time remote breakage support agreements with the accompanying subscription-based business models. That is what I see a real game changer in many industries. In reality, however, we are still somewhat away from a completely automating all maintenance tasks, but a significant proportion of on-site visits that we have used to do, and I think what now due to all the restrictions have maybe been left undone, I think that level will never return actually, but that will be supported by remote technology by these equipment specialists. And this in turn will create both significant pressure, but also an opportunity for business model innovation around technical support and aftermarket services. This is especially true for those companies proactively investing in new technology and ways of working. And also the changing perception of ownership is also a driver for this change. Companies are trending ever more towards asset-light models in their operation in an effort to optimize their cost position and margins. And this evolution towards subscription-based business models in industry brings also challenges with it. One major consideration is the impact to the balance sheets. You need to consider if you take all your supplied equipment on your balance sheet, how does that affect your financial position? because selling capital-heavy equipment as a service requires specific risk management practices and investments in product development. For example, manufacturers will need to ensure that products become more modular and transferable from one customer operation to another in case the service agreement ends before the useful lifetime of the equipment itself. And transferring ownership from the user of the equipment to the supplier also has an impact in the user's business. When outsourcing major parts of the operation and maintenance activities, expertise and knowledge will also be transferred away from the operational organization. This shift will enable the equipment provider to work towards gaining more of the total value created. And this redistribution will not happen without specific investment in commercial excellence capabilities within the aftermarket service business. Success will be determined by the ability to set up and capture the right value for the services delivered. And even though all of these changes create vast opportunities for organizations to adopt new ways of service-centric working without needing to follow the traditional maturity step process. But this will not happen without a dedicated investment into developing and making that happen. And even though it's a kind of great path forward and we see that everything is changing, I still make the statement that not everything is actually changing. Some things will remain. And I want to next talk a little bit about what I think that will remain. And the main thing where I want to highlight what I feel that will remain is to be able to successfully serve industrial customers regardless of the business model. The solution must provide value to the various user groups. Operators demand ever easier adoption and self-maintaining equipment. The production output from the equipment should be easily scalable to allow volumes to be ramped up and down according to the business cycle. The fundamental elements of the value creation will remain the same regardless of whether the equipment is sold, is a part of a subscription offering. Another element is that there always will be customers who want to maintain ownership for at least some part of the operations and maintenance, as they see those as core competencies contributing to their overall competitive advantage in their businesses. In addition, a company may follow a strategy to only pay for minimal external services while focusing on lowering the direct cost of operations to a minimum. These different scenarios demonstrate that there need to be a fully differentiated services portfolio if you want to serve, let's say, a full diverse customer base. And regardless of the concept or the ownership model, the physical tasks to operate and maintain the equipment, they will remain. This again requires constant investment in teams who can either perform the maintenance within the organization or provide support for other organizations to carry it out. And as we see, some things are definitely changing and changing fast, and other things will remain. But what are the critical success elements that will allow a company to stay on top of the aftermarket services business? Today, I actually make a claim that it has to do with the business model development. And that's something I want to talk about next. I'm going to use as a business model as defined by Clay Christensen. And you can see a small bio of Clay Christensen here on the bottom part of the screen. He is actually a very well-known academic and a businessman, and I really look up to his work and his writing. And based on his models, the first thing to consider is the value proposition. The customer value proposition is the heart of every business model. The key question here is, what customer problems am I solving? For traditional aftermarket services, the answer to this question has been quite clear always. With services offered to keep or restoring equipment to an operational state or maintaining that operational state. The overall customer value proposition is, however, more complex. In aftermarket services, it also includes the availability of the physical goods or services, as both are needed at a short notice by the customers. The level and availability of expertise and the way customer relationships are handled are both important factors in the value proposition. These elements need to be evaluated against the competitor's position to determine not just the completeness of the value proposition to customers, but also the level of the value differentiation compared to other players in the market. If the customer base is diverse, and it usually is, it may require multiple different value propositions separated by channel, brand, or some other distinct concept. When updating the customer value proposition, it is really a good idea and really prudent to examine the effects of a change on a profit formula, processes, and resources. Changes in the value proposition commonly cause changes in these elements as well. Investment in organizational capabilities is needed to ensure continuous renewal and innovation of the business model. Increased capabilities are prerequisite for advancing through the levels in aftermarket services maturity. After an overview, let's take a look on how to define a winning value proposition. And really here, the key considerations are that the different service level agreements or subscription services, the customer value proposition needs to be viewed through different lenses. This will depend on whether the offer is the primary business model or if it's being considered as an alternative model sitting alongside traditional aftermarket services. Where the organization has leapfrogged to the last two levels of the aftermarket service maturity model, like we had roughly half of our companies that are listening today, and selected only to offer services through agreements or subscription models, then the customer value proposition needs to be defined purely based on the outcome of how the equipment is used. The value outcome pricing model may also take external factors into consideration, for example, the consumption rate of inputs or the quality of the output. If service models are offered in parallel to the traditional approach, the value proposition should be tailored to those segments that have been identified as the best targets for a subscription service level agreements. Remember, not all of your customers want to leap to the same model at once. This will enable more precise definition of the value proposition, but will also challenge the organization to look at other elements of the business model and check for relevance. When we have the value proposition defined and ready to go, it is the time that we think about the profit formula. How to split the value we are creating with the customer and what kind of share can we get? And that's really, a fundamental question, because out of all the factors, the price is by far most influential. Set too high, volumes will not materialize. Set too low, assuming a consistent cost structure, then profit will not be achieved. There are numerous techniques available to aid in the process of setting the right price. The most important consideration is simply the alignment to the customer perceived value. In practice, this means that price setting needs to carefully consider both the value delivered and the competitive alternatives. Customer value is not uniform across all customers, and neither is the competitive landscape. This requires a systematic approach and platform to match the differentiated value a customer perceives with a recommended price. Modern technology is important in supporting these methodologies, especially given the high volume of products to price and in driving long-term sustainable advantage. However, technology alone is not enough. You need to have focus in organizational maturity and development to ensure that these improvements are cascaded throughout the organization. Marketing operations need to make sure that the price is strongly tied to the customer value proposition. And in the end, the price must be consumed and understood by sales teams who need to justify the position in front of a customer, basically in a split second, because if the customer notices the hesitation, then that price point is already gone. Innovation in pricing models can open completely new business opportunities that were not viable with older models, perhaps. Linking price to differentiated value is a fundamental process that needs to work. It also creates a starting point to define the cost structure needed to successfully execute the business model. Supply chain and logistics optimization is a key role to managing the cost structure. Typical aftermarket service organizations recognize a need to develop and invest in these capabilities in the second level of maturity. Development done here will carry forward into the future as the foundation for future service level agreements and subscription businesses. Basically, to put this into a nutshell, you need to consider kind of going from functional operational excellence position and focus to more broad-facing commercial excellence mindset. And focusing on all elements of the profit formula requires a shift to this commercial excellence mindset. And this commercial excellence maturity can be seen to develop along the same lines as the overall aftermarket maturity, but can and should be measured in a more detailed way based on several dimensions, like in sales, like in analytics, like in pricing separately, customers, product management. There are many measurements that you can do and should do. Then, when considering key resources and processes, they are defined in the literature as the most important resources, whether organizational, buildings, technology, or other that ensures that the customer value proposition gets actually delivered. In aftermarket services, key resources in a traditional sense would be the assets securing support availability, such as stocks and pools of highly skilled support personnel. Focus needs to shift from not only the availability of the highly skilled resources to a platform for operational support and the development of partners to scale the business. Aftermarket service teams can learn here from consumer services concepts where modern technology is used to coordinate, manage demand, and allocate capacity in an optimal way. Think about your Uber or food delivery companies. Even though maybe all not highly financially successful, I think there are lessons to be learned on how we can, through partnering, create models also in industrial services, which has not been used that traditionally. The equipment itself will become a key resource in outcome-based commercial models. This will in turn highlight the need to consider the maintainability and total cost of operations even further. The same shift also makes equipment design and delivery teams a key resource also from aftermarket perspective, making this an important consideration when you think about organizational development when in the high stages of maturity. Then focusing on some key processes. One of those, when designing those new processes, enabling the high levels of maturity, breaking down organizational silos for a common way of working will be the winning concept for the future. Businesses need to focus on delivering value to the customer and setting the right metrics. They will need to focus on process development, especially in few areas. I think some examples of these areas are, for example, improving remote support capabilities. This can be seen initially as a process change, but I think that after that, innovation in this field will also create those changes in the business model that will bring more opportunities to create sustainable profitability. Improving purchasing and logistics. Many organizations where aftermarket services are a separate business unit, these functions are organized independently from the equipment business. So the purchasing logistics, you have one for projects for the equipment, another one for services. If these combined can leverage higher economies of scale and share expertise when the silos are taken down. In pricing side, in the lower levels of maturity pricing processes, in aftermarket services and capital sales, they are separate. But I claim that when taking on a subscription-based models, this is no longer even possible. If you have your equipment pricing like this, after sales pricing something else, and then a third model for subscription, which is again something completely different in a third organization, your customers will be able to cherry pick whatever they see best for themselves, and you will not optimize your profitability. But the good thing is that the sales and especially sales and pricing activities can act as a change agent for all of these processes in the aftermarket services. And could merit for some special focus through that. And driving this process change within the aftermarket can be challenging, and it is challenging. We all know that. in the lower, especially in the lower levels of the services maturity, as there, the first hurdle to get over is to get the appropriate level of management attention to begin with. But focus on developing these key processes will become a source of sustainable competitive advantage, and you need to manage that through a long-term roadmap and a plan, because when you step up in those 4 ladders, or then you decide to leapfrog from 1 to 4, you will get the focus, and with the focus, you will also get the attention that you need to deliver what you are kind of promising. And then I just want to conclude shortly of what we have talked about today. So we began with small market research, and kind of through that, we can see that there seems to be a link between the share of aftermarket services within a company on how profitable they can be, meaning that investment in that business makes sense, like it does to us already now. It just makes sense. And but we need to think about when we get that focus and when we get that investment opportunity, how do we do that in the best way? We need to consider about how do we need to develop our organization, and how do we need to develop our processes and the supporting technologies. We need to be quite considerate of what is the right thing to do right now for us, but to also put that into a plan. If we do this now, how will it help us in 3 to 5 years' time? And also how to make sure that all of those investments we do, they are supporting also in our renewal of our business models. So what is also the things that we are going to let go from our old business models, because we cannot always just be adding layers on top. We sometimes need to, even if it feels painful, we need to let go of some things that we have developed in the past. And when thinking about your business models, really put the customer in the center. Start from the customer value proposition, then think about the price, and then define the cost structure, how to deliver the service or the product, or the combination of these 2 things. And with this conclusion, Thomas, I think we can move on to the Q&A session.
Yeah. And we actually already have quite a lot of questions being submitted. So that's very good. What I'll do is I'll just take the screen back, and then we can move to the Q&A. So the first question that came in was regarding so just give me a second. So let me see here. So one question, and you already touched upon it. So do you see the aftermarket model going from a transactional to a subscriptional, especially with the increasing use of IoT?
I think IoT is an enabler, because that will give the equipment supplier more knowledge of how the equipment is used and what let's say shape the equipment is in. So let's say I take a simple example. Let's take I take a printing press, just as a concept now. It's a big machine, very expensive machine. Maybe you feel scared of kind of selling it as per use, because you don't know how well the customer operational team is handling it. There's a risk that they mishandle it because they don't own it anymore. But with IoT, with online condition monitoring, basically, it's easier to determine that is the machine run, let's say, within specifications? Is it being mishandled? Are there some other accidents happening that is none of the fault of the machine? So I see IoT as a really an enabler that is kind of is helping to manage risk in these agreements, and that's why I wanted to highlight that as a key contributing factor here in that transition.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another question that we have is, what, in your opinion, what will change or not regarding the dealer network, and how can OEMs cope to keep the independent dealers engaged and motivated?
I think that's a really great question. I think there's probably not a single answer. So what I think is you probably will see a little bit different development in different industries. If I, for example, if we take automotive industry, there that like in Europe, especially, what we have seen is the quite strong consolidation of that dealer network, which I think is driven from the fact that uh, it's only through that consolidation that the dealer type of business sees that it can survive. Because if you look at it, the growth of e-commerce may make that step redundant if they are not very clear and very big on delivering the value, the extra value, both to the, let's say, to the equipment supplier and then to whatever their clients is. So I think that if you are a small dealer, you are in a problem because you probably cannot have the best in class availability and best in class service, all of these things, which I think future customers will demand, and kind of what the equipment supplier wouldn't be able to offer just through a simple e-commerce channel.
Yeah.
So I think it's a through consolidation dealers can remain, but I think in some other industries also the OEMs will kind of shift more to that space, handling more directly with end users, using e-commerce, remote support, having more intimate customer relations.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good question for OEMs to ask themselves in terms of, reshaping their strategies in terms of working via a dealer network or trying to handle it themselves directly with the end users, where they then are able to create that relationship directly with their customers or end customers, so to say. Because I know at a few of our events in the past, I've had some people mention that because of e-commerce, they were now starting to rethink of completely bypassing
Yeah.
dealers, or at least in some markets. But yeah.
Think about one kind of a small advice I have given a few times is that if you're an OEM, think about your dealer as just as your employee, and the discount you're giving, that's the salary to the dealer. And then you can outweigh that, okay, if I would have my own employee, would it cost more or less? And would I be able to provide a better or worse service to my end customers? That's one way of looking at it. And I think using that kind of a thought process can reveal that, okay, maybe our next strategy should be this or that.
Yeah. All right. So another question is, do you see differences among world regions on how to succeed, or what to prioritize to succeed in the service business? So should OEMs have different kind of market strategies depending on if they're approaching Europe or North America or Asia, or even more specifically, DAC or Benelux, or yeah.
I think it all comes down to the what we discussed in one of the slides was your customer segments or customer differentiation, because you will have customers that will value different things, and I mean what customers value, it can be driven by the region, or it can be driven by the application, or the customers what kind of a material they're processing, what is their business. I think it can be related to many different factors. Um, I really cannot say if it's this or that stronger. Of course, there are cultural differences. There are, you could say, higher willingness to pay from services in probably in Europe than, for example, in Southeast Asia. Just due to, for example, GDP differences in economies. I think that those are differences that are there, and you need differentiated service offerings to go to different markets.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, do you have insights on so to size the marketing team needed for service, so product management, pricing, communication in a typical B2B industrial company? Minimum size, bracket, which criteria would you consider to define the number of headcounts? One thing I can say just before you go, Kalle, is we ran a survey ourselves looking specifically at pricing. And one of the questions we had was how many, professional pricers do companies have in their team? And the majority, 2/3 of respondents had between 0 and 5. So quite small teams when it comes to pricing. Very, very few, and it went less and less, as it incrementally went up to, 6 to 10, 11 to 20. It was about 8% that had 30 or plus. But yeah, almost 68% had between 0 and 5. So at least when it comes to pricing, that seems to be the general consensus that it's a small team.
Yeah, I have used in some places this kind of a rule of thumb that for these, let's say, functional roles, so not considering now that, for example, frontline salespeople, but for these who are kind of driving the organization to the next level of maturity, maybe you could consider like one FTE per 100 million of revenue. Something like this might make sense, and something that I have like personally seen maybe in my previous history in the Finnish industry, is that what's needed to really to keep the development going. But that's of course varies quite much about your selected business models, your sales channels and everything. So I don't think there is like one size fits all answer to this one.
Yeah. Another question then. So when it comes to the whole discussion of the webinar, what industries are leading this progress? So if participants wanted to dig into case studies, what are there specific sectors that are ahead, and which ones are still lagging? And then when you look at the ones still lagging, what are their biggest challenges or hurdles, and how come? So what is the difficulty they're having to surmount to accelerate the progress?
Yeah, I think, and unfortunately, I don't have yet. I don't yet have a like a definite data or answer for this. But let's say based on some work I have done, I have a let's say a qualified feeling feeling for this. And my qualified feeling maybe at the moment is that what I see is that let's say the smaller the equipment that is being provided, the further along you are, and the bigger the equipment or the let's say the capital thing, the lower you are. Because what I see is that for those, let's say, even like you could even call them maybe engineering company style equipment or process providers, that where each of the capital goods that they're selling, the price tag could be hundreds of millions or a billion or something like this. They're usually, let's say, lower in this transition. And I think that's just to do the way that for example, thing about shift for subscription, that would be, let's say, quite tough from the balance sheet perspective. And I think there are few of these kind of criteria that can be used. But I don't have, let's say, investigation study that we are working on, but I don't have that's my gut feeling at the moment.
Yeah. Well, the good news, Kelly, is actually Van Davel and Copperberg right now, we're putting together a survey report looking specifically at this, and it will be available later in the month. So there we'll be able to kind of highlight and pinpoint exactly which sectors are leading, and more specifically, what are the kind of biggest challenges to overcome, and providing some analysis as well. So watch out for that later in October. And then another question that we have is, Kalle, what is your opinion or suggestion on finding and developing technical experts? So do you see a stronger role from companies to educate the next generations?
Yeah, this might be a bit of a personal answer. The best ways of how I've seen this working has been with this basically this apprentice model, and I think that is highlighted today because a lot of that work will be done remote in the future. But you can never get that like if you need to guide someone through something, you need to do that sometimes yourself first. And I think the fastest way of to learn is that you really have that, let's say, personal, uh, let's say, experienced person, and then an apprentice uh, who can really teach, and you learn personally. I know that probably now it's really tough time to do something like that, but that is the best model that I have seen. I think trying to mimic those, let's say, interactions then and how to scale it, I think that would be a really good way. But yeah, my expertise unfortunately is not how to. I think we should talk to maybe some educational experts or something like how could we scale that relationship and interactions.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I have a question as well, actually, because in one of the slides, looking at how the aftermarket journey is changing, highlighted the mass adoption of remote services uh, as one of the key changes that happened this year, especially as a lot of countries were in lockdown or very restricted access to customer sites. So obviously, remote technology became increasingly important. And what I've seen is that a lot of OEMs then started investing in remote technology, or fully investing and implementing and rolling out with their customers during 2020. But the question is actually more from a pricing perspective, because I've seen examples of both, of OEMs offering remote service to their customers for free, during the pandemic, because of course it's a special, I mean, it's a strange situation where everyone is struggling. You're struggling, your customers are struggling, their own customers are struggling, so you offer it for free as kind of relationship builder and to show support. And then others who decided from the get-go to offer it for a fee, because perhaps they've been drilled down for so many years that it's impossible to go from free to fee. So they felt if they start to offer it for free now, they would never be able to generate revenue out of it later on. So what is your, if you had been in charge of OEM, say in April, and you've been tasked with implementing and rolling out remote technology, how would you have done it? Would you have charged for it? Would you have given it for free? Would it have been dependent on which customer segment, or how would you have done it?
Well, I would have definitely put a price tag on it to
Yeah.
show the value to my customers, that this really has a value. Because unless you show it, no one will kind of pick it up by themselves. If you just say this is free, then everyone thinks, oh yeah, this is free. And so I would definitely put a price tag on it, showing that it has value. Then maybe then, at least for my most profitable and best customers, you can then discount it to be free or next to free, as a show of support, as you said, during very exceptional times. But I think the important thing is to show the value, at least to make sure that your customers know that this is a valuable service that we are providing. If you're not showing that, they will consider that it's not of value, and when you would like to charge for it, then they still consider it's no value and probably are not willing to pay.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, Kelly, I think that is actually it for today. So thanks for joining us, and everyone can continue following Copperberg. We're collaborating with Vendavo quite a bit in October through the Aftermarket business platform and the survey report, which we will publish as well later this month. So Kelly, thanks for joining us. I don't know if you have any final. Oh yes, you were going to tell us what have you learned today. I
Well,
give you
I think
50 minutes to think about it. So
yeah, I think the I, I was thinking about something else, but I think the key learning from it today was that I think there is a lot of companies now really well on their way in this aftermarket service maturity, as we saw from the poll results, and that was really nice to see, and really kind of a good thing to get this kind of confidence that yes, this is happening, this is really happening, and a lot of companies will then get results and good profitable results when that shift is being made. That was I would say, key learning for me today.
Yeah. Good. Perfect. Well, thank you again, Kalle. Thanks you for everyone who joined us today, and thanks for all these contributions and questions. It's always good to get questions. So yeah, thanks, and hope to see you soon, all either at the Copperberg webinar or Copperberg event, hopefully very soon physically in 2021 as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.